My name is Daniel, and this happened nearly 12 years ago in a forgotten stretch of the Appalachian backcountry. I was 24, reckless, and hungry for solitude. I packed a tent, food, and a rifle, and hiked miles off any known trail until even the sound of distant roads was gone. The first night was uneventful. The second night, however, everything changed. Around midnight, I woke to an unnatural silence. No crickets, no owls, not even the whisper of wind. Then came the smell, a rancid, coppery odor that rolled into my tent like a living thing. My skin prickled, and I could swear I heard breathing, slow and ragged, just beyond the nylon wall of my tent. I grabbed my rifle, heart hammering, and forced myself to listen. That's when I heard it. The sound of something dragging across the forest floor, long, deliberate, like claws raking over leaves. I should have left that night, but I stayed. The next morning, sunlight made everything feel absurd. I convinced myself it was just my imagination. I packed up camp and hiked further into the hollow, deeper than I'd ever dared before. The air was damp, heavy with moss and decay. I stumbled across the ruins of a stone foundation, perhaps an old cabin long claimed by the woods. As I explored, I noticed something etched into one of the stones, a crude carving of a circle with lines running through it, almost like a sigil. My stomach knotted. The smell from last night suddenly returned, faint but undeniable. I heard it then, a distant humming. At first I thought it was bees, but it grew louder, resonant, almost like chanting. I froze, scanning the trees. The forest was empty, yet the sound grew stronger, vibrating in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. The chanting returned, closer this time, and with it, that sickly, metallic stench. By the third night, my nerves were shredded. I built a larger fire, hoping the flames would push away the unease gnawing at me. But deep in those Appalachian woods, firelight feels like a fragile island surrounded by endless black. Around midnight, the chanting began again. Closer, clearer. It wasn't words I could understand, but the cadence was deliberate, ritualistic. I clutched my rifle, pointing it toward the darkness. Then came the crunch of footsteps. They were slow, measured, circling my camp. I spun around, aiming blindly at shadows. My fire flickered as if smothered by an unseen breath. For a few seconds, silence fell. Then something let out a long, guttural moan, low, almost human, but warped. My chest seized with terror. I fired a shot into the woods. The blast echoed, but nothing ran. Nothing screamed. The smell returned, overwhelming this time, thick and coppery, like rotting meat mixed with rusted iron. My head swam. I swear I saw something move between the trees, a tall, distorted figure, pale against the dark, with limbs too long to belong to a man. I didn't sleep at all that night. By dawn, exhaustion weighed me down, but I was too afraid to close my eyes. I decided to hike out, pack up, and put this nightmare behind me. But as I retraced my steps, the forest felt wrong. Landmarks I knew I'd passed before were gone, replaced by endless thickets of gnarled trees. It was as though the woods themselves had shifted overnight. The sun barely pierced the canopy, and every path I took led me back into the hollow. Hours passed, and I realized I was trapped. My compass spun erratically, the needle twitching as if confused. By afternoon, I stumbled across something that froze my blood. A freshly killed deer, its carcass shredded and arranged in a circle. The same strange sigil I'd seen on the stone foundation was carved into its hide. Flies swarmed the body, but the smell wasn't just rot. It was that same metallic stench that had haunted me for days. I dropped my pack, bile rising in my throat, and heard it again. That low moan, drifting through the trees, closer than ever. Something was hunting me. I ran. My boots slammed against the forest floor as panic finally overpowered reason. Branches whipped across my face and thorns tore at my arms, but I didn't care. All I wanted was out. Yet no matter how far I pushed, I ended up circling back into the same hollow. The woods were toying with me. When exhaustion forced me to stop, I collapsed beside a fallen log, gasping for breath. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the mud. They were massive, human-like but elongated, with clawed impressions at the tips. The prints circled where I had been walking, as though the thing had been following me, watching me from the tree line. The chanting started again, louder now, and unmistakably multiple voices. They rose and fell in unison, echoing through the hollow, vibrating in my chest. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head. Then, from behind the log, I heard wet, ragged breathing. Slow, deliberate. Whatever it was inches away. I raised my rifle, trembling, praying I'd have the courage to fire before it reached me. I spun around, rifle aimed, but there was nothing. Only shifting fog in the endless trees. My pulse thundered in my ears, and for a moment I thought I had imagined the breathing. Then, from deep in the mist, 2 pinpricks of light appeared. Eyes, reflective, animal-like, but higher off the ground than any creature should be. They blinked, and the chanting stopped. Silence pressed in, suffocating. My fire had gone out hours ago, leaving only the pale light of dawn bleeding weakly through the canopy. I backed away slowly, unwilling to turn my back. The eyes followed, moving with unnatural smoothness, never breaking contact. Finally, I snapped. I fired a shot. The blast cracked the silence, and the eyes vanished. The recoil jolted my shoulder, but relief was short-lived. The smell slammed into me again, overpowering, so thick it coated my throat. I gagged, dropping to my knees. The sound that followed will haunt me forever. A distorted laugh, deep and wet, like something imitating a human voice, but failing. It echoed all around me, as though the woods themselves were laughing. By the 4th day, I was broken. No food, no clear direction, and no way out. I hadn't slept, barely drank, and every nerve in my body screamed to collapse. My mind kept replaying that distorted laugh. Was it a person? A creature? Or something older? Something that had been here before us? I stumbled back to the ruined stone foundation, almost as if drawn there. The mossy stone seemed to pulse with energy, and the sigil glared up at me from the earth like a warning or a claim. Around the foundation, I found remnants of burned wood, bones, and something that looked disturbingly like teeth scattered in the dirt. As I crouched there trembling, I felt it again. The presence. The air grew colder, heavy, pressing down on me like invisible hands. My vision blurred, and I heard whispers layered over each other. Hundreds of voices speaking in tones I couldn't comprehend. Something shifted in the trees. And then, I saw it clearly for the first time. It stepped into the half-light. Tall, thin, skin stretched tight over its bones, face smooth and eyeless, but with a mouth far too wide, twitching into a grin. The thing stood only a few yards away, silent, watching me with that eyeless face. Its grin stretched impossibly wide, the corners splitting upward as if the skin itself could tear further at will. My whole body screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Then, it moved, not walking, sliding. Its limbs jerked unnaturally, long arms dangling and swaying like broken branches. Every shift of its body made a wet, creaking sound, as though its bones weren't meant to carry it. I raised my rifle again, but before I could aim, the whispers surged louder. They weren't in the forest anymore. They were in my head, burrowing deep, pushing images into my mind. I saw people, hundreds of them, wandering the hollow. Their eyes were gone, their faces blank, each of them grinning with the same mouth as the thing before me. I squeezed the trigger, but the rifle jammed. My trembling hands fumbled with it, useless. The creature tilted its head slowly, almost curiously, and then stretched its arms outward in a grotesque mockery of a welcome. It wanted me to come closer. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, clawing through the dirt as I scrambled to get away. The thing didn't chase me. It glided forward, calm, deliberate, like it knew I had nowhere to run. The whispers inside my head rose to a deafening roar, and my vision blurred with tears. I crashed into the carcass circle again. The deer's body was still there, untouched, rotting, yet the sigil carved into its hide looked freshly cut, as though it had been etched moments ago. The smell was suffocating, burning my lungs. Suddenly, movement flickered in the corner of my eye. Shapes emerged from the tree line, figures, people, dozens of them, pale and thin, stepping silently into the hollow. Their mouths twisted into the same hideous grin, eyes sealed shut as though stitched from the inside. They surrounded me in a slow, tightening circle. My heart slammed against my ribs as I realized the whispers weren't just in my head anymore. They were coming from them. Every mouth moved in unison, chanting that same alien rhythm I'd heard since the first night. The creature towered above them all, arms open, waiting. I don't remember how I got out. The last thing I recall clearly is the circle closing in, the creature bending down until its mouth hovered inches from my face, opening wider and wider until it was nothing but darkness. The chanting reached a pitch that split my skull, and then nothing. When I woke, I was lying on the edge of a logging road, my pack shredded, rifle gone. The sun was high, and the forest was silent. At first, I thought it had been a nightmare, but then I noticed my boots, caked in mud thick with blood. My skin reeked of that metallic stench, clinging to me like smoke. I never found the hollow again, no matter how many times I tried to retrace my steps. The old maps show nothing in that part of the range, just endless forest. But sometimes, at night, I still hear the whispers, faint but clear, curling at the edges of my mind. And when I dream, I see its grin. My name is Daniel, and the Appalachians don't let go of what they claim. My name is Jacob, and this story takes me back to the fall of 2011. I was a wildlife photographer, often hiking into deep, unmarked parts of the Appalachians to capture shots of elk and black bear. That October, I set out alone into the Blue Ridge, expecting a quiet trip. What I found instead has haunted me ever since. On the second evening, I reached a narrow ridge with a sweeping view of the forest below. I set up camp just before sunset, the mountains glowing orange and gold. For a while, it was perfect, until I noticed a figure. Across the ridge, maybe 100 yards away, a man stood motionless. He was tall, wearing what looked like a torn coat, but his face was impossible to see in the fading light. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring. I called out, raising a hand. No reply. The figure didn't even shift. When the sun finally dipped below the horizon, he was still there, watching me. By the time night fell, I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a hunter or lost hiker. But unease gnawed at me. I built a fire, hoping its glow would keep the night at bay. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. At around midnight, I stepped out of my tent to stoke the fire. That's when I saw him again. The man was closer, standing at the tree line, maybe 30 yards away. The firelight revealed more detail this time. His coat was ragged, filthy, like it had been pulled from the ground. His posture was unnatural, stiff, arms hanging loosely at his sides. "Hey!" I shouted, rifle in hand. He didn't react, not a flinch. His head tilted slightly, as if considering me, but no words came. Minutes passed. Finally, I stepped toward him, determined to scare him off. But the instant I did, the figure moved. Backward, not walking, gliding, slowly retreating into the trees until the shadows swallowed him whole. That was the moment I knew something wasn't right. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every sound in the forest felt amplified. The crack of a twig, the rustle of leaves, even the wind seemed to carry whispers. I stayed awake until dawn, rifle across my lap, eyes fixed on the trees. When morning came, I packed up quickly, determined to move further along the ridge. The daylight helped calm my nerves, but the forest still felt heavy, as though it was holding its breath. I hiked for hours without rest until I found a clearing where the ridge opened to a wide valley. From there, I could see for miles. Relieved, I set up camp again, convinced I'd left the stranger behind. But just as the sun began to dip, I spotted movement on the far side of the valley. My stomach turned cold. He was there, the same tall man in the ragged coat, standing on the opposite ridge. Despite the distance, I could feel his attention fixed on me. He hadn't followed me on foot. He had somehow appeared ahead. This time I didn't wave. I just stood frozen, watching him as darkness crept in. That night, the fire gave me no comfort. Every flicker of light cast moving shadows that played tricks on my eyes. The ridge was quiet, too quiet. Even the usual nighttime calls of owls and insects had vanished. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Not distant, but near, circling just beyond the firelight. My pulse spiked. I raised my rifle and shouted into the darkness, my voice cracking. No answer. Then, a sharp whistle pierced the silence. It wasn't random, it had a rhythm, almost like a tune. I swung the rifle in every direction, but the sound kept shifting, now behind me, now to the left, now above on the ridge. I caught movement then, a flash of the ragged coat between the trees. He was circling me, staying just far enough to remain in shadow. My fire sputtered as a sudden gust of wind swept through the camp. And I knew if the flames died, I'd be in the dark with him. I scrambled to throw more wood into the pit, hands shaking. Behind me, the whistling stopped. Silence again. And then, close to my ear, "Jacob." I spun around, rifle raised, heart hammering so violently I thought I'd collapse. No one was there. Just empty black trees stretching endlessly into the night. The voice had been so close, I swear I felt the heat of breath against my skin. I backed into the firelight, refusing to step beyond it. Hours passed like that, every muscle locked, waiting for him to appear. But he didn't. Dawn finally came, and for the first time in days, I considered running all the way back down the ridge, abandoning my work. Yet something inside me said, if I turned my back, he'd follow. I pressed on, heading deeper along the ridge trail. But it wasn't long before I realized I wasn't alone. I saw him again in the daylight, always distant, always still, watching. Sometimes he'd vanish between trees, only to appear later, ahead of me. No matter how fast or slow I moved, he was there. I thought of leaving the ridge entirely, but every attempt to descend ended in thick, impassable brush or cliffs too steep to navigate. It was as though the land itself kept me on his path. By the third day, my sanity was unraveling. I barely slept, barely ate. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt him drawing nearer. My camera, once my lifeline, sat unused. What photo could capture something that refused to exist under logic? That evening, I reached a section of ridge where twisted pines crowded the trail. Their branches hung low, clawing at my clothes as I forced my way through. When I emerged into another clearing, I froze. He was waiting. Not across the valley this time. Not in the shadows. He stood in the middle of the clearing, no more than 50 feet away, motionless. In daylight, I finally saw his face, or what remained of it. His skin was gray, stretched thin, with dark hollows where eyes should be. His mouth was fixed in a crooked grin that looked carved into his flesh. I aimed my rifle, hands shaking. "Stay back," I screamed. The figure tilted his head, that grin widening, splitting his cheeks. Then, without a sound, he vanished. Not walked away, not ran. He blinked out of existence. Terror clawed at me as I staggered back from the clearing. My body screamed to run. But where? The ridge only led forward or back the way I came. Both directions felt like a trap. I chose forward, stumbling blindly, muttering prayers I hadn't said since childhood. Night came too quickly. My fire that evening barely caught, and the wood seemed damp, refusing to burn strong. As I crouched over the flames, I heard the whistle again. Softer this time, almost playful. I turned slowly. There he was, perched on a boulder above me like some grotesque statue. His limbs were wrong, bent too sharply, as though his bones had broken and reset 100 times. His grin caught the firelight, teeth glistening like shards of glass. I fired. The shot cracked across the ridge, echoing into nothingness. When I looked back, the rock was empty. No blood, no body. Just the whistle, now circling me in the dark, drifting closer, closer, closer. I covered my ears, but it was inside my head now, whistling the same 4 notes over and over, a lullaby for madness. At some point, exhaustion must have dragged me into sleep, because I woke at dawn with the fire cold and the wood silent. My rifle lay across my chest, my hands cramped from holding it all night. I rose and walked, desperate to find any sign of civilization. Hours later, I stumbled upon something chilling, an old decayed campsite. Rusted cookware, torn canvas, a collapsed tent half buried in leaves. Whoever had been here hadn't left by choice. I knelt by the collapsed tent and found deep, claw-like scratches across the fabric. My stomach dropped when I realized there were bones inside. Small, brittle, half buried under soil and moss. The whistle returned then, drifting through the trees. My head snapped up, and there he was again, closer than ever. Standing just beyond the ruined tent, his head bent low, his grin stretched impossibly wide. For the first time, he spoke. "You should have left." The voice was cracked, broken like glass grinding on stone, my chest seized with cold terror. This thing wasn't human. It never had been. Panic consumed me. I bolted from the ruined campsite, crashing through undergrowth, not caring where I ended up. The whistle followed, weaving between the trees, faster than my steps. No matter how far I ran, it was always ahead of me, taunting. Finally, the ridge trail opened into another overlook. I staggered to the edge, chest heaving, and looked down into the endless sea of trees below. The thought of leaping crossed my mind, Death on the rocks would be better than whatever waited behind me. But when I turned, I saw him standing at the opposite edge of the overlook, mirroring me. Same posture, same stance, as though I were staring into a twisted reflection. Slowly, his grin widened until it split his jaw open unnaturally wide. His body shuddered, limbs cracking, stretching longer, taller. He stepped toward me. The whistling rose into a screech that made my teeth ache, vibrating through my bones. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, screaming for it to stop. When I looked up, he was gone. The forest was silent again. I don't know how I survived. My memory after that moment is fractured, scattered like broken glass. I remember stumbling down the ridge, delirious, until I found a dirt road where loggers eventually discovered me. They said I looked half dead, eyes wide as if I'd seen hell itself. I never told them what I really saw. Who would believe me? They chalked it up to exhaustion, dehydration, maybe hallucinations. But I know the truth. That thing on the ridge was real. And worse, whatever it is, it's not bound to one place. Some nights, when I lie awake, I hear it again. That whistle. Soft at first, and closer, always closer. And when I glance at the window, I sometimes see a shape reflected in the glass. Tall, ragged, grinning, waiting. My name is Jacob, and if you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachians, pray you never hear the whistle. My name is Lucas, and I grew up in a small Appalachian town where the mountains were both our livelihood and our curse. Coal mining fed families, but it also swallowed lives. As a kid, I'd hear stories about abandoned shafts where men had died, their voices supposedly echoing long after. I always thought it was just folklore, until I found out differently. In my early 20s, I took a seasonal job clearing old mining trails. One afternoon, I wandered too far off the marked path and stumbled across a boarded-up entrance hidden beneath ivy and moss. The wood planks were weathered, splintered, as though clawed from the inside. Curiosity tugged at me. Against my better judgment, I pried one loose. Cold, stale air exhaled from the shaft, carrying with it something foul like wet stone mixed with decay. I leaned in, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught rusted rails leading into endless black. And then, I heard it. A whisper. Soft, drawn out, my name. Not hey or hello. My name. Lucas. My skin went cold. No one should have known I was there. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. I convinced myself it was just the wind, or maybe an echo of my own breath bouncing off the stone walls. But then it came again, clearer, firmer. Lucas, come down. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But something about that voice froze me in place. It wasn't just calling, it was luring. I lifted my flashlight again, and for a split second, I thought I saw movement deeper inside. A pale hand gripping the edge of a rusted rail before sliding back into the dark. The rational part of me wanted to walk away, board it back up, and pretend I'd never found it. But curiosity, or maybe something stronger, kept me rooted. I pulled the rest of the boards free and stepped inside. The air grew heavier with each breath, my light reflecting off wet stone walls slick with condensation. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, like more than one person was walking with me. The deeper I went, the louder the whispers became. But they weren't just calling my name anymore. They were laughing. The mine sloped downward, rails vanishing into water pooled on the ground. My boots splashed as I moved forward, and each ripple sounded louder than it should have, as though the mine itself was listening. The whispers circled me. Some came from behind, some ahead, some above, where the ceiling dripped with stagnant water. The laughter was faint, but mocking, as if unseen mouths were pressing close to my ear. My flashlight beam trembled, and when I lifted it toward a side tunnel, I froze. A figure stood there, half-shadowed, hunched unnaturally. Its head tilted as if studying me. "Dad?" I whispered before I could stop myself. It looked just like him. Broad shoulders, miner's helmet, coal-dusted face. But my father had died in a cave-in when I was 12. The figure raised a trembling hand and beckoned me forward. My legs moved on their own, ignoring every desperate plea from my brain. I reached the tunnel. The figure stepped back into the shadows. And then it wasn't my father anymore. The thing shifted, its coal-dusted face stretching unnaturally, jaw hanging loose as though unhinged. Its eyes burned white in the dark, far too bright to belong to anything human. I stumbled backward, slamming into the tunnel wall. My flashlight flickered violently, casting frantic streaks of light across the stone. The figure lurched toward me, its limbs jerking like a puppet pulled by tangled strings. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Its mouth gaped wider, and the voices poured out. Not one, but dozens. Men, women, children, all screaming, whispering, laughing, overlapping until the sound became unbearable. I bolted down the main tunnel, desperate to find my way out. My boots slipped on the wet stone, my breath ragged in the choking air. Behind me, the voices chased, growing louder, closer, until it felt like they were inside my skull. I didn't stop running until I saw a faint glimmer of daylight up ahead. I pushed forward, gasping, only to find myself back at the boarded entrance. Except the boards weren't broken anymore. They were sealed tight, as though I had never pried them loose. I slammed my fists against the boards, screaming for help, but the wood didn't budge. My flashlight flickered again, sputtering in the damp air. I turned, pressing my back against the sealed entrance, and saw the tunnel alive with movement. Dozens of pale figures emerged from the shadows. Some crawled on all fours, their fingernails dragging across stone with a screech. Others limped, broken bones jutting beneath translucent skin. Their mouths hung open, whispering my name in unison. But their lips didn't move. The sound came from everywhere at once, echoing inside my skull. I raised my rifle, though I knew a bullet couldn't stop something like this, and fired a desperate shot. The blast echoed deafeningly, but when the smoke cleared, they were closer. Too close. The first one reached out, fingers cold and damp, brushing my cheek. I shoved it away, stumbling deeper into the mine, praying for another way out. The whispers grew louder, weaving into a single phrase. "Stay with us, Lucas." I ran until my lungs burned, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly off jagged walls. The tunnel split into 3 directions, each yawning open like the throat of some enormous beast. I didn't hesitate. I dove into the left passage, my boots splashing through stagnant pools. The whispers followed, but now they carried fragments of voices I recognized. My father, my grandmother, friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Each voice calling my name, begging me to stop, to turn back. I slowed, confusion cutting through fear. I thought I saw my father again at the end of the passage, helmet tilted, his face drawn with exhaustion. This time, he didn't beckon. He just stood there, shaking his head. I blinked, and the figure dissolved into black mist that bled into the stone. I stumbled forward, only to realize the tunnel was collapsing. Dust rained from the ceiling, Rocks tumbled down, sealing the path behind me. I was trapped. The whispers fell silent. Then, from the darkness ahead, came a voice I'd never heard before. Deep, hollow, hungry. "You belong to the mountain now?" The words chilled me more than the touch of the dead. My flashlight dimmed, the battery bleeding out. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a cavern, far larger than any I'd seen in maps or mining records. The walls shimmered, not with moisture, but with veins of something dark red, pulsing faintly as though alive. Shapes moved within the rock, pressing against the surface as if desperate to break free. In the center of the cavern stood an altar of stone, jagged and uneven. Upon it lay helmets, boots, and rusted tools, belongings of miners long gone. Some were shattered, some looked freshly placed. The whispers returned, swirling around me, forming a chorus that shook the walls. Faces pressed through the rock, mouths open in silent screams. My knees buckled beneath the crushing weight of it all. Something rose from behind the altar. A shape too tall, too thin, its body draped in shadows that bent unnaturally. It had no face, just a hollow void where features should be. Yet I felt it staring into me. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. Because suddenly, I couldn't move at all. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My body was locked, frozen under its gaze. The whispers inside my head turned into screams, louder and louder, until I thought my skull would crack. The faceless figure lifted one long arm, pointing at me. Instantly, the shadows around the cavern slithered down from the walls, wrapping around my legs, my arms, my chest. They pulled me toward the altar, dragging me over the broken helmets of the dead. I thrashed with every ounce of strength, my rifle slipping from my grasp. My flashlight clattered across the stone and shattered, plunging everything into near total blackness. The altar rose higher, as if the mountain itself was lifting me up. I could see them now, the faces of the miners trapped in the walls, their eyes wide, their mouths silently begging. Some were men I recognized from old town photos. Some looked centuries old. The figure loomed above me, and then it leaned close, hollow face inches from mine. Stay, my arms pinned against the stone. I could barely breathe. Shadows pressed against my chest like a weight. The figure raised its hand again, and the whispers quieted into one final phrase. "You are one of us." The rock beneath me split, revealing a pool of black liquid that bubbled and hissed. I tried to fight, clawing at the altar, but the shadows shoved me downward. My skin burned where the liquid touched, searing like acid, pulling me deeper. The faces in the walls shrieked in silence, their mouths open as if they were watching another soul being claimed. My body sank, and the last thing I saw before the darkness closed over my eyes was my father's face pressed in the rock, tears streaming down his stone-carved cheeks. I should have died then, but death never came. Instead, I became part of the mountain, my voice joining the endless chorus of whispers. And that's why, if you ever hear your name called in an abandoned Appalachian mine, don't answer, because it might be me. I woke up days later, outside, lying near the boarded entrance, as though I had never stepped inside at all. My flashlight and rifle were beside me, untouched. The boards were back in place, sealed tight. No sign of my struggle remained. But something had changed. When I returned home, people said I looked pale, hollow-eyed. At night, I no longer dream. I hear. The whispers are always there, waiting, echoing through my head, like a constant hum. Sometimes they speak in voices I love, sometimes in voices I've never heard before. And sometimes, when I'm walking alone in the woods, I feel compelled to stop, to stare into the trees and listen. Because because now I'm one of them. And someday, you'll wander too close to the mountain. You'll hear your name, soft and familiar. You'll step inside, and I'll be waiting. My name is Thomas, and this happened back in 2014 when I was 22. I grew up in eastern Kentucky, where the Appalachian ridges rose up like dark, watchful giants. Hiking was second nature to me, and I often explored the old trails carved by loggers a century ago. That summer, a buddy of mine told me about a place called Laurel Gorge, supposedly haunted, though I never bought into those stories. Locals claimed that during certain nights, you could hear screams echoing through the gorge, like the mountain itself was in pain. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I did believe in finding places untouched by tourists. So one weekend, I packed my gear and set off to camp along the gorge. By dusk, I had pitched my tent on a narrow plateau overlooking the ravine. The forest below looked endless, a black sea of treetops rustling with unseen movement. As night fell, I heard it for the first time. A scream. It wasn't human. Too long, too raw, like it had been ripped straight from the lungs of something dying. It echoed across the gorge and settled deep into my bones. At first, I thought it might be an animal. Mountain lions sometimes made sounds that could pass for human screams. But there was something different about this. It carried a strange rhythm, rising, falling, then stopping suddenly, as if cut short. The scream came again, this time closer, clearer. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the trees, but the gorge was too wide, too dark. The forest below seemed to breathe, and every shadow looked like it was hiding something. I told myself to stay calm. I zipped my tent shut and tried to distract myself with music, but even with earbuds in, I could still hear it faintly, dragging itself across the walls of the gorge like fingernails on stone. Then, at exactly midnight, I heard what I can only describe as answering screams. Multiple voices, overlapping, shrieking from different points across the gorge. Some sounded far away. Others sounded impossibly close. That's when I realized it wasn't just one thing in the woods. It was many. I didn't sleep, not even for a second. The forest became alive with noises, but none of them sounded natural. Every so often, the screams would break into laughter, high-pitched, mocking, unnatural. By 3 a.m., I had convinced myself I had to leave. I started packing my gear quickly, hands shaking, but the second I stepped out of the tent, I froze. There were shapes at the tree line, pale, thin figures, just barely illuminated by the moonlight. They weren't moving, just standing there, watching. Their bodies were twisted, unnaturally long, with heads cocked at strange angles. My gut screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Suddenly, one of them broke the silence. It screamed, and instantly, the rest followed, their voices blending into a horrible, distorted chorus that seemed to tear at the air itself. The sound hit me so hard, I stumbled back into my tent, clutching my ears. When I looked again, they were gone. The tree line was empty. I sat in my tent, paralyzed, waiting for daylight. But the night stretched on endlessly. Every sound outside became unbearable. The crunch of leaves, the snapping of branches, the low moans carried by the wind. At some point, I heard footsteps circling the tent. Slow, deliberate. They crunched softly around me, stopping just inches away. I held my breath, clutching the flashlight like a weapon. The tent fabric trembled as something brushed against it, dragging a finger or a claw along its surface. And then a voice whispered, not screamed, not moaned, whispered. It was so faint, I almost thought I imagined it. But I swear it said, "Come down," into the gorge. I don't remember how long I sat there, shaking, tears in my eyes. When the first pale light of dawn finally broke, I unzipped my tent and looked outside. The forest looked normal again, peaceful. But the ground around my tent was covered in footprints, dozens of them. I wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but something inside me hesitated. The gorge stretched out below, and even in daylight, I could feel it calling me. It was as if the voices from the night still lingered in the air, urging me down. So, like an idiot, I gave in. I left my tent behind and followed a narrow deer trail winding downward. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Not peaceful, just wrong. Even the birds refused to sing. At the bottom, I reached the gorge floor. A stream cut through the rocks, and the trees grew so thick they blocked most of the sunlight. That's when I found the first carving. It was etched into the trunk of a massive oak, a screaming face. The detail was so precise, it looked almost alive, its eyes bulging, mouth wide in eternal terror. As I scanned the trees, I realized every trunk around me was carved with the same face. Hundreds of them. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, trying to convince myself it was just some backwoods artist's twisted idea of a joke. But the deeper I went, the more carvings I found. Each one seemed fresher than the last, the wood still wet, like the faces had been carved only hours ago. Then I saw something worse. In the mud near the stream lay bones. Small ones at first, raccoons, foxes, maybe deer. But further along, I found something unmistakably human. A femur, half buried. A rib cage, snapped like dry twigs. I gagged, covering my mouth, when I noticed the mossy rock wall just ahead. It wasn't a wall at all. It was a doorway, a jagged hole leading deeper underground. From inside, the whispers began again. My name this time. Clear as day. Thomas. I should have run. I should have left. But instead, I raised my flashlight and stepped inside. The tunnel was narrow, damp, and reeked of rot. My flashlight beam trembled across slick stone walls where claw marks raked deep into the rock. I moved carefully, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But something compelled me forward. The whispers grew louder, not echoes. Voices, multiple, layered, chanting in a language I didn't recognize. My skin prickled as the air grew hotter, thicker, as though the gorge itself was alive and breathing. Finally, the tunnel opened into a cavern. My light revealed something so grotesque, I almost screamed. The walls were covered in more carvings, but not just of faces, bodies. Twisted, writhing bodies stacked upon each other, mouths open in silent screams. And at the center of the cavern stood a crude altar made of bones, animal and human, lashed together with sinew and vine. As I approached, every whisper stopped. The silence was suffocating. Then, something laughed. The laugh was guttural, distorted, as if it came from all directions at once. My flashlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw them. Figures, pale and twisted, crawling along the walls like insects. Their limbs bent backward, their mouths stretched wide, teeth jagged and too many. Their eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the beam like a predator's. They weren't human anymore, if they ever had been. One of them dropped from the ceiling, landing in front of me on all fours. Its head snapped to the side, studying me. Then it opened its mouth. The scream that came out wasn't just sound. It was pressure, vibrating through my chest, rattling my teeth. I stumbled backward, my flashlight falling from my hand. In the dark, dozens of voices screamed with it, shaking the cavern walls. I ran. I didn't care where, I just ran. The tunnel seemed endless. No matter how far I ran, the whispers followed, now frantic, almost angry. My lungs burned, my legs ached. But adrenaline pushed me forward until I finally saw the faint outline of daylight. I burst out of the gorge, collapsing onto the forest floor, gasping like I had just surfaced from drowning. For a moment, the forest was silent again. Normal. But as I looked back at the cave, I froze. The tree carvings had changed. Every screaming face now had eyes, and they were all staring at me. I stumbled to my feet and sprinted back toward my camp, not once daring to look over my shoulder. By the time I reached the plateau, the sun had fully risen. My tent was still there, untouched. But the footprints were gone, erased as if they had never existed. Still, I knew what I saw. I left everything behind, my tent, my gear, even my favorite knife. I just ran until I reached my truck. The whole drive home, I felt eyes on me, like something had followed me out of the gorge. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear those screams echoing inside my skull. I tried to tell a few friends, but they just laughed it off. Then one night, I woke up to find something carved into the tree outside my bedroom window. A face, screaming. The next morning, it was gone. To this day, I've never set foot near Laurel Gorge again, and I never will. But sometimes, when the wind howls through the mountains, I swear I hear it. Those same screams calling me back. And every time I wonder, if I go back, will they finally let me leave? Or will they carve my face into the trees too? My name is Aaron, and this happened when I was 24. I was living in a small Appalachian town in West Virginia, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and where stories of the old mountains traveled faster than news. There was one legend in particular that always stuck with me: the Lantern Man. Folks claimed he was a miner who died in an accident back in the 1800s, crushed in a shaft collapse. They said his ghost still wandered the ridges at night, carrying a flickering lantern, luring travelers deeper into the woods until they were never seen again. I always laughed it off as campfire nonsense. But one October evening, while hiking alone along a forgotten trail, I saw it. A light. It bobbed in the distance, weaving between the trees. Too steady to be fireflies, too unnatural to be a camper. I stopped in my tracks, watching as the glow grew brighter, closer, cutting through the fog like a single, searching eye. And then, faintly, I heard boots crunching on the leaves. But there was no one there. I told myself it was just another hiker, someone heading back to camp. But the light didn't move like a person's lantern. It floated, swayed gently, too smooth, too slow. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling in the silence. The light stopped. It hung there, suspended between the trees, flickering faintly as if the wind were trying to snuff it out. Then it began moving again, toward me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but my feet refused to move. I stood frozen as the light bobbed closer until I could see the outline of a figure holding it. He wore a miner's helmet, his clothes ragged and caked in dirt, his boots dragging as though weighed down by chains. The lantern in his hand glowed faintly orange, but his face was hidden beneath shadow. Then he spoke. His voice was a guttural rasp, like stone grinding against stone. "You're not supposed to be here." My stomach dropped. The figure stood just 20 feet away, unmoving except for the faint sway of the lantern in his hand. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was some old-timer pulling a prank. But the air grew heavy, pressing on my chest, and the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. The lantern man tilted his head slowly, and the light swung with it. I wanted to scream, to run, but before I could move, The lantern flickered, and suddenly he was closer. 10 feet away now. I stumbled back, heart pounding. "Stay away," I shouted. He raised his free hand, pointing past me, deeper into the woods. "Down below," he whispered. His voice wasn't carried by air. It reverberated inside my skull. When I blinked, he was gone. The light vanished, and the forest went black again. But I could still hear the sound of boots crunching leaves, circling me. I broke into a run, my flashlight beams shaking wildly across the trees. Every step echoed, but it wasn't just my footsteps. I could hear his too, heavy and dragging, always just behind me. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing. My lungs burned, my legs wobbled. I whipped around, expecting to see him. But the clearing was empty. I tried to steady my breathing when something caught my eye. A hole. It was a mine shaft, hidden by overgrown vines and collapsed wood. The ground around it was blackened, scorched, as if burned long ago. The air that seeped from it was colder than ice, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and sulfur. And then, from deep inside the shaft, the lantern light flickered again. It wasn't outside anymore. It was below. And this time, I heard more than one set of footsteps. I should have turned back. Every part of me knew that. But something about the light pulled me in, like a moth to flame. I crouched at the edge of the shaft, shining my flashlight downward. The beam caught movement. Figures, multiple of them, shuffling in the darkness. Their helmets glinted faintly, their lanterns swinging side to side. But their faces, they weren't faces at all. Just voids, black hollows where eyes and mouths should have been. One of them tilted its head upward, staring directly at me with those empty sockets. And then they all screamed at once. It was deafening, echoing up the shaft until my eardrums felt like they would burst. I fell backward, dropping my flashlight, clutching my head. When the sound finally stopped, the lanterns below flickered out. But one still burned, at the very bottom. And slowly, steadily, it began to rise. I scrambled to my feet, panic clawing at my chest. The rising lantern floated higher and higher, as though carried by unseen hands. When it was nearly level with me, I saw him again. The Lantern Man. But this time, his face was visible. Half of his skull was caved in, flesh hanging in tatters, one eye socket empty. The other eye burned faintly with orange light, glowing like coal. His mouth twisted into something between a snarl and a grin. "Join us," he hissed. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, and when I looked again, he was gone. But the lantern remained, floating above the shaft, glowing brighter and brighter until it blinded me. Then, silence. When my vision cleared, the lantern was gone. The shaft was dark again, but I wasn't alone. The crunch of boots echoed from behind me. I turned slowly, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might explode. There he was again, standing in the clearing, lantern in hand. But this time, there were others behind him. Dozens of miners, their faces melted, torn or missing entirely, stood in a jagged circle around me. Their lanterns flickered weakly, their bodies swaying as though caught in some invisible current. One by one, they began raising their lanterns. The glow spread across the clearing until everything was bathed in an orange haze. The ground itself seemed to pulse with heat, and a low rumble shook the earth beneath me. I realized too late where I was standing, on top of a collapsed shaft. The ground gave way, and I plummeted into darkness. The last thing I saw before I blacked out was the Lantern Man leaning over the edge, his glowing eye fixed on me. When I woke, I was lying in a tunnel deep underground. My head throbbed, and the air was thick with dust and sulfur. My flashlight flickered weakly, but the shaft stretched endlessly in both directions. The sound of boots echoed again, but this time it wasn't behind me. It was all around me. Shadows shifted in the darkness, flickering with faint lantern light. I staggered to my feet, running blindly through the tunnels. Every corner I turned led to another passage, another dead end, another whisper. At one point, I swore I saw daylight. I sprinted toward it, but when I reached the opening, it was just another lantern glowing faintly in the dark. And when I turned, he was there again. The lantern man, closer than ever. His mouth opened wide, too wide, splitting his jaw in half. And the scream that came out wasn't just sound. It was fire. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing against a stone wall. The tunnels twisted like a maze, and I realized the truth. I was trapped. The lanterns multiplied, flickering all around me, forming a circle of light. The miners emerged one by one, their boots dragging, their heads hanging at broken angles. They whispered in unison, their voices merging into a single, terrible chant. Down below, down below, down below. The lantern man stepped forward, raising his light. Its glow spread like wildfire, illuminating the cavern. Every wall was lined with bodies, skeletal remains lashed together, their jaws frozen mid-scream. Chains dangled from the ceiling, some still holding fragments of bone. I understood then. This wasn't just a collapse. It had been a sacrifice. And I was next. I don't remember how I escaped. Maybe I didn't. The last thing I recall is the lantern man, pressing the glowing flame of his lantern against my chest. It burned cold, freezing me to the bone, as his hollow eye bore into mine. When I woke, I was outside, lying at the edge of the collapsed shaft. My body was unhurt, but my chest was scorched with a handprint-shaped burn. I staggered back to town, swearing never to speak of it. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls through the ridges, I see a faint orange glow moving through the trees outside my window. And worse, I hear boots crunching the leaves, sometimes closer, sometimes right outside my door. And I know, deep down, the lantern man never let me go. My name is Jacob, and this happened when I was 21. I had just moved to live with my uncle in a remote stretch of the Appalachian foothills in North Carolina. His cabin sat near a valley known by locals as the Hollow. People said the place carried voices, strange sounds that weren't wind, weren't animals, but whispers that belonged to no one. I brushed it off as small-town superstition until one night I decided to find out for myself. The Hollow was a steep ravine about 2 miles from the cabin. I hiked down just before dusk, carrying only a flashlight and a hunting knife. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. The forest seemed to choke on silence, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. That's when I heard it. A whisper. Soft, broken syllables drifting from somewhere ahead of me. It wasn't English. It wasn't any language I knew. I froze, my skin prickling, because the whisper wasn't just ahead. It was around me, above me, behind me. The hollow wasn't empty. I told myself it was the wind, just the way it slid through the gorge, echoing oddly. But the more I listened, the more I realized these weren't random sounds. The whispers rose and fell like words, like conversations. Then I noticed something chilling. Every time I took a step, the voices stopped. When I held still, they started again, closer. My flashlight's beam shook as I swept it across the trees. Nothing. just endless trunks and shadows. I called out, "Hello?" my voice cracking. The whispers instantly ceased. The forest swallowed the sound. Then from behind me, almost brushing my ear, came a breathless hiss. "Jacob!" I whipped around so fast I nearly stumbled. The trees swayed silently, empty. My blood ran cold. No one should have known my name. I ran. Not full sprint, just a panicked rush downhill, branches clawing at my clothes. The deeper I went, the thicker the fog became, curling between my legs and choking the ground in white. That's when I found it. At the bottom of the hollow stood the remains of something. Stone walls, half collapsed, overgrown with vines, like the ruins of an old foundation. I stepped closer, realizing the stones had carvings etched into them. Symbols, circles, spirals. Some looked disturbingly like faces, their mouths open in silent screams. The whispers returned, louder now, as though the stones themselves were speaking. One phrase repeated over and over, harsh and broken, until I realized it was in English. "Stay, stay, stay." The air grew so cold, I saw my breath in front of me, even though it was summer. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, hypnotized by the spirals carved into the stone, the way they seemed to shift under the beam of my flashlight. Then something broke the trance. A shadow. It moved across the wall, long and crooked, though there was nothing between me and the beam of light to cast it. The shadow bent unnaturally, like a figure crawling on all fours. The whispers grew frantic, louder, faster, overlapping until they became a roar of unintelligible voices. I clutched my knife, though deep down I knew it was useless. From the fog, a shape began to emerge. A head, narrow, elongated, hollow sockets where eyes should be. Its mouth opened slowly, and the whispers stopped. What came out instead was a scream. The scream wasn't loud. It was worse. It was low, guttural, vibrating through the ground and into my chest. My flashlight flickered violently, plunging the clearing into near darkness. I backed away, heart hammering. "This isn't real," I whispered to myself. But the thing kept coming, crawling, dragging itself forward, its limbs too long, bending the wrong way. Behind it, more shadows slithered along the stone walls, peeling themselves free as if the carvings had given birth. Dozens of them. I turned and bolted uphill, not caring where the trail was. The whispers returned, this time inside my skull. Words I didn't understand, pounding with every step I took. The forest itself seemed to twist, trees growing denser, branches snapping across my path as though trying to herd me back. I don't know how long I ran, but at some point I tripped, slamming hard onto my knees. My flashlight flew from my hand, its beam rolling across the ground. That's when I saw them again. Figures, crouched in the fog just ahead, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their heads tilted in unnatural unison, like puppets waiting for strings. One of them whispered my name again, Jacob, stretching it into something inhuman. I scrambled to grab the flashlight, its weak beam landing on a tree marked with the same spirals I'd seen on the stones. But this carving was fresh. The bark peeled back, sap still dripping. The whispers swelled, filling the hollow like a storm. Then silence. I don't remember standing up. I don't remember running again. But suddenly, I was back near the ridge, the faint outline of my uncle's cabin visible through the trees. Relief crashed over me, until I realized something was wrong. The cabin lights were on, but my uncle wasn't home. He had left 2 days earlier to visit family. I stood frozen, every instinct telling me not to go inside. But the door creaked open on its own, spilling warm yellow light into the night. From within, I heard whispers. The same ones, only now they weren't distant. They were right there, waiting. Against all reason, I stepped inside. The cabin looked normal, too normal. Every object was perfectly in place, but it felt staged, like a photograph of home rather than home itself. And then I saw the carvings. Spirals scratched into the wooden beams, symbols etched into the floorboards. The whispers swelled again, circling me. And then, slowly, my uncle's voice joined them. "Jacob." It came from the back room. Shaking, I forced myself toward the door. I opened it and froze. The room was empty, except for the walls. They were covered floor to ceiling in carvings. And in the center of the floor, burned into the wood, was my name. The air turned icy. My breath fogged in front of me. I backed away, but the floor creaked beneath me, not like wood, like something alive shifting under my feet. The carvings pulsed faintly, glowing red. I bolted out the door into the forest, not looking back. I don't remember the run home, only that by dawn I was pounding on a neighbor's door miles away, gasping for help. When I returned later with the sheriff, the cabin was different. No carvings, no light. Just dust and silence, as though no one had lived there in years. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I still hear them. Whispers carried on the wind, calling my name from the hollow. Years have passed, but I never went back to the hollow. The locals still warn about it, though they never say exactly what's down there. Just that people who wander too deep don't always come back the same. I sometimes dream about the carvings. Spirals etched across walls, across trees, across skin. And in those dreams, the whispers are clear. They don't just want me to stay. They want me to bring others. And when I wake, I swear I still hear them, curling against my window, soft as breath. Jacob, if you ever find yourself in the Appalachian woods and you hear whispers with no source, don't answer, don't listen. Because once you hear your name in the hollow, it never forgets you. My name is Stephen, and what happened to me in the fall of 2017 still keeps me awake at night. I was working a temporary logging job deep in the Appalachians, near an isolated stretch called Black Pine Ridge. The crew I worked with often told stories around the fire about strange figures they'd seen in the tree line at dusk. Tall, silent shapes that never came close, but never left either. They called them the Watchers. I laughed it off as camp talk, just ways to scare the rookies. But one evening, when I stayed behind to finish some equipment checks, I noticed something out of place. Up the ridge, maybe 50 yards away, a figure stood among the trees, tall, lean, still as stone. I called out, thinking it was one of the guys. No answer. The figure didn't move. I looked down for half a second, and when I looked back, it was gone. That night, the crew teased me. But I knew what I saw, and it was only the beginning. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. But the forest didn't feel the same. The air was heavier, charged, like a storm was coming. While the others worked, I caught myself glancing toward the ridge again and again. And then I saw it. No. Them. Two figures this time. Both impossibly tall, their silhouettes stretched against the pale daylight. They weren't moving, just watching from the distance. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. The others turned to look at me, confused. But when they followed my gaze, the ridge was empty again. "City boys losing it," one of them muttered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing soft cracks of branches outside camp, as though someone or something was circling. Every time I looked, nothing was there. could feel them, waiting. By the third night, I wasn't the only one who noticed. One of the older loggers, Dave, came back to camp pale as a ghost. "They're up there," he whispered, "on the ridge, watching." We all laughed nervously, but when he swore on his life, the mood shifted. Later, I stepped away to relieve myself and caught sight of something that made my stomach drop. There were 3 of them now, standing perfectly spaced apart, their bodies blending with the black pines. When my flashlight beam brushed across them, the figures tilted their heads in unison, slow, unnatural, deliberate. I froze. The beam flickered. For a heartbeat, I swore I saw faces, blank, pale, stretched too thin. I bolted back to camp, heart pounding, but when I tried to tell the others, no words came out, just stammering. And the whispers started. The whispers began low, like wind slipping through the trees, but they weren't random. They carried rhythm, tone, like voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. None of the others seemed to hear it, but I did. Every night after, the whispers came earlier, closer, until it felt like they were brushing my ear. I barely slept. My appetite was gone. Then one night, I woke to silence. The kind of silence that feels unnatural, suffocating. I sat up in my tent, and through the thin fabric I saw a glow. Pale light, moving. I unzipped the flap just a crack. One of them stood at the edge of camp, its skin ghostly white, its body towering above the fire pit. And it wasn't holding a lantern. The glow was coming from within its chest, pulsing like a dying star. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stop from screaming. The figure stood there, its head slowly turning toward each tent, as if counting us. Then its head snapped toward mine. The whispering swelled, louder than ever, pounding inside my skull. I staggered back, clutching my temples. And then, it was gone. The next morning, the ground where it had stood was scorched black, the grass dead. I showed the others, but they brushed it off as a campfire ember. That night, Dave disappeared. We searched the woods for hours, calling his name. All we found was his jacket hanging from a branch 20 feet up, ripped clean through, like something had lifted him straight into the air. Nobody made jokes anymore. After Dave vanished, half the crew quit on the spot and hiked out. The rest of us stayed, pressured by the company. But the watchers didn't stop. Each night they came closer. Sometimes 1, sometimes 5 or 6. Always silent, always still. But we felt them circling us. The whispers grew clearer. I swear I could hear my own name in their voices. Stephen. Stephen. I started seeing them even in daylight, standing just beyond the tree line, melting into the shadows when anyone else looked. I tried to convince myself I was hallucinating. Until one evening, I looked up from chopping wood, and one of them was standing no more than 10 feet away. It didn't move, didn't blink. But I swear, its mouth was smiling. I dropped the axe and stumbled back, screaming for help. The others came running, but by then, the figure had vanished. The crew didn't believe me, or maybe they just didn't want to. That night, I packed my bag. I couldn't stay another day. But as I slipped away from camp under cover of darkness, I realized something terrifying. The whispers weren't behind me anymore. They were in front of me. Up the trail, through the fog, the silhouettes appeared, lined up across the ridge like sentinels. At least a dozen this time, their pale bodies almost glowing in the moonlight. There was no way around. They wanted me to come closer. I froze, my chest heaving. Every instinct screamed to turn back. But behind me, the forest shifted. Branches snapped, leaves crunched. Something was following. I was trapped. The watchers stood ahead, Motionless, the whispers swelled into a single, unified word. Closer. I staggered forward, trembling, until I was within 20 feet of them. My flashlight flickered again, and in that moment I saw their faces. They weren't human. Their features were stretched too thin, their skin almost translucent, veins glowing faintly beneath. Their eyes, if you could call them eyes, were just pits of black. The nearest one leaned forward. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, and I swear I saw more whispers pouring out like smoke. I turned and ran. I don't remember how far or how long. Just the pounding in my ears and the crushing certainty that they were right behind me. When I burst back into camp, the fire was out. My co-workers were gone. Every tent stood empty, their belongings scattered like they'd been torn apart in a hurry. Only one thing remained. In the dirt by the fire pit, scrawled deep into the ground, was a spiral. And inside it, written in crude, shaking letters, was my name. Stephen. I fled that ridge before sunrise and never looked back. I quit the job, left the mountains, and tried to bury the memories. But the watchers don't forget. Even now, years later, I see them sometimes. On the edge of highways at night. Reflected in glass when no one's behind me. Always still. Always waiting. And the whispers. They've followed me too. They seep into my dreams, into the quiet moments. Calling my name, reminded me of what I left behind on Black Pine Ridge. And sometimes, when the world is silent enough, I swear I can hear them breathing right outside my window. My name is Daniel, and I swear what I'm about to tell you is true. Back in 2015, a couple of friends and I decided to camp near Miller's Gorge, a deep cut in the Appalachian mountains that locals never went near. They said it was cursed, that people who camped there vanished or came back not right. We thought it was just backwoods folklore, and we were young, stupid, and looking for a thrill. We set up our tents right near the edge of the gorge, where the trees broke into a sheer drop, and laughed about ghost stories while passing around beers. It was just after midnight when we heard it. A scream. Not an animal. Not a person calling for help. It was guttural, ragged, stretched with pain. It echoed up from the gorge, rising and falling like someone being torn apart. We froze. Every hair on my body stood up. Then it came again, closer this time, and I swear, it sounded like it was climbing. The three of us, me, Kyle, and Marcus, stared at each other, our faces pale in the firelight. None of us spoke. Finally, Kyle tried to laugh it off. "Probably a cougar," he said, though his voice trembled. I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew better. I had heard cougars before. This wasn't the same. The scream came again, only this time it was mixed with something else. A scratching sound, like nails dragging along stone. Then a loud crack echoed from below, like a tree limb snapping in half. Marcus grabbed the flashlight and shined it toward the gorge. But the beam barely reached halfway down before being swallowed by the darkness. That's when we heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, climbing the rocks. They weren't rushed or clumsy. They were steady. And they were getting closer. We scrambled back from the edge, suddenly aware of just how exposed we were. The fire seemed too small, our campsite too fragile. Whatever was coming up that gorge was coming straight for us. We argued about leaving. Kyle wanted to pack up and hike back immediately. But Marcus insisted that moving in the dark would only get us lost. Or worse, run us straight into whatever was climbing up. So we sat there, frozen, listening. The footsteps grew louder, echoing off the gorge walls. Every few seconds, a rock would tumble loose and clatter down, followed by that horrific scream, closer now, sharper, almost inside our heads. I couldn't stand it anymore. I crept toward the edge, holding the flashlight tight, and pointed it downward. For a moment, I saw nothing but mist rising from the gorge floor. Then the beam caught movement, something pale, clinging to the rock wall. It wasn't a person. Its limbs were too long, its head jerking unnaturally as it climbed. Its mouth hung open, and even though I was 100 feet above it, I swear I could see its teeth glistening. It looked up. And then it screamed again. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. "It's not human!" I yelled, my voice breaking. Kyle and Marcus didn't believe me until they heard the next scream themselves. It was deafening, echoing through the gorge like it came from everywhere at once. The sound rattled my bones. Then we saw it, emerging over the lip of the gorge. The creature pulled itself onto the ridge with an unnatural grace, its pale body slick with moisture, its limbs twitching like broken sticks. Its face, or what was left of it, was stretched too thin, the skin pulled tight over hollow sockets. It stood there, motionless, its head cocked to one side like it was listening. Then it took a step toward us. Kyle grabbed a burning stick from the fire and hurled it at the thing. For a second, the flames illuminated its body, and I wish they hadn't. Its chest was sunken, ribs poking through translucent flesh, and its mouth was impossibly wide. It shrieked again, shaking the trees. We ran. We tore through the woods, branches whipping our faces. The firelight vanished behind us, and soon all we had was the faint glow of the flashlight bouncing wildly in Marcus's hand. The screams followed. Sometimes they sounded behind us. Other times they seemed ahead, cutting us off. It was like the gorge itself carried the sound wherever it wanted. We tried to stick together, but in the chaos, I lost sight of Kyle. One second he was right behind me, the next he was gone. Marcus shouted his name, but the only reply was another scream. This one sounded different, shorter, choked, almost like Kyle's voice. No, I muttered, refusing to believe it. We didn't stop running until we reached a clearing, our chests heaving, legs ready to collapse. But we weren't alone. At the far end of the clearing, half hidden in the shadows, the creature stood waiting. And beside it was Kyle. "Kyle!" Marcus shouted, taking a step forward. But something was wrong. Kyle's movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. His eyes looked glassy, his skin pale as if all the blood had drained out. The creature loomed beside him, its wide mouth still open in a grotesque grin. Then, in a voice that was almost, but not quite, Kyle's, it spoke. "Stay," it rasped, the words stretched and broken. My stomach turned to ice. The thing wasn't just screaming, it was learning, mimicking. Kyle's head twitched violently before his mouth opened, letting out the same bone-rattling scream we had heard from the gorge. Marcus broke. He grabbed my arm, and we bolted back into the woods, leaving Kyle, if it was even him anymore, behind. The screams chased us, multiplying, overlapping, until it felt like the forest was full of them. We didn't know where we were going. The forest twisted, every tree looking the same. My lungs burned. Marcus was sobbing as we stumbled through the undergrowth. Finally, we tripped over a fallen log and collapsed, gasping for air. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, crack, a branch snapping. Footsteps. We raised the flashlight, and the beam caught a figure moving between the trees. My heart leapt. Was it Kyle? But when the light steadied, I realized it wasn't him. It was dozens of them. Pale figures, tall and broken-limbed, stepping out from the shadows. Their mouths hung open, each one letting out a low, guttural hum. The sound built and built until it fused into one horrific scream. Marcus grabbed my hand. "We're dead," he whispered. The creatures began to close in. We turned and ran again, though I don't know how my legs carried me. Marcus stumbled, and I had to drag him along as the screaming grew louder, closer. Suddenly, the trees broke open into another clearing, and in the center was an old, rotting wooden cabin. Its roof sagged, the door barely hanging on. We didn't think. We just ran inside, slamming the door shut behind us. The air inside was thick with mold and rot. Cobwebs clung to the rafters, but it was shelter, at least for the moment. Outside, the screams circled us, pounding against the walls. I could hear claws scratching wood, footsteps shuffling just beyond the door. Then, from deeper inside the cabin, another sound. A whisper. I turned slowly, raising the flashlight, and saw that we weren't alone. In the corner, crouched in the shadows, was another figure. At first, I thought it was one of the creatures, but as the light fell across its face, I realized it was human, or had been. The man's skin was paper thin, his eyes sunken. He looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in decades. He shook his head violently, putting a finger to his lips. "Quiet," he hissed, his voice hoarse. Marcus and I froze. The screams outside stopped. The forest fell into suffocating silence. Then the man leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "They listen. They take voices. Don't speak." Before we could react, the door exploded inward. Pale arms reached through, claws digging into the wood. The creatures had found us. Chaos erupted. Marcus screamed, and instantly every creature outside echoed it back. Dozens of screams rattling the cabin walls. The old man lunged at Marcus, trying to cover his mouth, but it was too late. Pale figures poured inside, their twisted limbs bending unnaturally as they crawled over the floor, walls, even the ceiling. One grabbed Marcus, dragging him toward the door. His screams mixed with theirs until I couldn't tell them apart. I ran. I don't even remember how. I burst through a broken window and tore through the forest until I collapsed on the dirt road hours later. When locals found me the next morning, they didn't believe my story. They said Miller's Gorge had claimed many before me. I never saw Marcus or Kyle again. But sometimes, at night, when the wind is just right, I hear their voices screaming in the dark. My name is Anthony, and I'll never forget the night I got lost on Devil's Backbone, a narrow mountain trail deep in the Appalachian range. Locals warned me about it, saying hikers vanish there more often than anywhere else. But I was stubborn. I had been hiking solo for years, and the idea of a haunted trail sounded more like tourist bait than truth. I set off late in the afternoon, planning to camp halfway up before continuing in the morning. The first few miles were fine, but once the sun began to set, the forest changed. The air grew heavy. The trees leaned in closer, their branches twisted like arms reaching down. That's when I realized the trail markers were gone. The dirt path beneath my boots split into two directions, neither of which I remembered. I should have turned back. Instead, I picked the left trail. And that's when everything started to go wrong. The deeper I went, the quieter the woods became. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. After another half hour of hiking, I realized I hadn't seen any landmarks, and my compass needle spun erratically, refusing to settle. My phone had no service. That's when I saw it. A tree ahead of me, massive, gnarled, its trunk split down the middle. Hanging from its branches were dozens of shapes. At first, I thought they were bird nests, but as I got closer, I saw they were dolls, handmade, strung up with twine, their faces painted with soot and ash. Some were missing eyes. Others had their mouths sewn shut. As I stared, I swear I heard them whispering, tiny, broken voices slipping through the still air. I backed away, heart pounding, and nearly tripped on the path. But when I looked up again, the trail behind me was gone. Panic set in. I turned in circles, trying to retrace my steps, but every direction looked the same, walls of trees, twisted and suffocating. Then I heard it. Footsteps. At first, I thought it was another hiker. Relief rushed through me. But when I called out, the footsteps stopped instantly. Silence pressed down again. I stood there, frozen, waiting. Then, slowly, the footsteps started up once more. This time, closer. I spun the flashlight beam toward the sound, but it only lit up trunks and undergrowth. No person, no animal. The air grew colder. My breath misted. And then a voice whispered right beside my ear, "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, but no one was there. Only the path stretching deeper into darkness. I didn't want to go forward, but something in that whisper made it clear I wasn't allowed to leave. I pushed forward, trembling, my boots crunching against the dirt. The trail narrowed, roots curling up like skeletal hands trying to trip me. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing. Moonlight broke through the canopy, revealing something that made my blood run cold. An old campsite. The tents were torn, shredded by something with claws. Sleeping bags lay ripped open, their contents scattered. A rusted lantern sat in the middle, still faintly glowing, though no fuel could possibly remain. I crouched, heart hammering, and noticed claw marks etched into the trees around the clearing. But they weren't random. They formed symbols, strange runes that pulsed faintly in the moonlight. And then I saw the worst thing of all. On one of the tree trunks, carved deep into the bark, was a single word, S-T-A-Y. I stumbled back, my mind racing. This wasn't just an accident. Someone, or something, had marked this place. That's when the lantern flickered. It sputtered, the dim glow flaring brighter, then dimming again. With each flicker, the shadows around the clearing seemed to move, stretching into tall, crooked figures. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but they didn't go away. The shadows leaned closer, long fingers reaching out, their heads tilted in unison as though listening. And then they whispered. Dozens of voices at once, layered on top of each other, repeating one phrase, "You should have stayed." I bolted, running blindly into the forest, the whispers following me. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw faces in the trees. Eyes watching, mouths grinning. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. The forest twisted unnaturally. No matter how far I ran, I kept finding myself back at the same clearing, staring at the cursed lantern. My chest heaved, my legs burned, and still I couldn't escape. Finally, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. My flashlight rolled away, its beam spinning wildly across the ground, before stopping on something half buried in the dirt. A journal. Its pages were weathered, torn, stained dark. I flipped it open with shaking hands. The last entry read, "They don't let you leave. The path always returns. If you see the lantern, don't look at the shadows. Don't listen to their voices. Burn the book before they find you." Before I could react, the whispers surged again, this time closer. And from the corner of the clearing, something stepped into the light. It wasn't a shadow. It was real. The figure was tall, impossibly thin, its skin pale and stretched like parchment over bone. Its face was obscured by shadow, but its eyes glowed faintly like embers smoldering in a dying fire. It stepped closer, each movement jerky, unnatural. I clutched the journal like a weapon, even though it was useless. The figure tilted its head, and a jagged smile split its face. Then, in my own voice, it spoke. "Anthony." My stomach dropped. Hearing your name in your own voice is wrong. It echoed through the clearing, bouncing off the trees until it felt like the forest itself was saying it. I turned and ran again, though I knew it was hopeless. The path twisted, looped, and once more spat me back at the clearing. This time, the lantern had gone out, and the clearing was full of them. They closed in slowly, their whispers rising into a chorus. My name echoed over and over, each voice mimicking me perfectly, until it felt like I was being drowned in myself. Desperate, I pulled my lighter from my pocket and flicked it to life. The flames shook in my trembling hand. I remembered the journal's warning, "Burn it." With shaking hands, I lit the corner of the book. The dry pages caught instantly, flames racing across them. The creatures shrieked, recoiling, their whispers twisting into guttural screams. The forest around me trembled, the ground shaking violently. Trees split open, collapsing. The shadows stretched and snapped like rubber bands pulled too tight. I dropped the burning journal and stumbled back as the creatures writhed, clawing at their faces. For the first time all night, the path ahead of me looked clear. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted down the open trail, the fire behind me lighting up the trees like a beacon. The screams faded, replaced by silence so deep it made my ears ring. After what felt like hours, the woods thinned, and I stumbled onto a dirt road. Relief surged through me, and I collapsed to my knees, sobbing. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A truck pulled up, and the driver, an older man, leaned out. "Son, what the hell are you doing out here?" I tried to explain, but the words wouldn't come. He just shook his head. "You're lucky. Most who wander into Devil's Backbone don't make it back." He drove me to the nearest town, and I thought it was over. But that night, in the motel bed, I woke to a sound. A whisper. My own voice, right beside my ear. "You should have stayed. I left the Appalachians the next morning and swore I'd never return. But the nightmare followed me. At first, it was whispers in the dark, my own voice echoing from the corners of my apartment. Then the shadows began to shift at night, forming shapes that leaned over my bed. Sometimes, I wake up to the sound of the lantern flickering. Other times, I hear my name called from the hallway, spoken in my own tone. I tried burning every journal, every scrap of paper I wrote on, hoping it would sever the connection. But nothing helps. The last time I looked in the mirror, I saw them. Not one, but dozens. Pale faces with ember eyes, staring back at me, grinning. I don't think I escaped Devil's Backbone that night. I think it just let me go. My name is Daniel, and what I'm about to tell you happened when I was 19. I grew up in the Appalachian Mountains, in a town so small most maps don't even bother marking it. Back then, I loved hiking alone, wandering into the deep woods where silence felt ancient, untouched. One October weekend, I decided to push further than I ever had before. Deeper into a stretch of forest rumored to have no trails, no signs of settlement. But the rumor was wrong. Because out there, hidden in the trees, I found something I wasn't supposed to. It was a cabin. The place was crooked, its wooden planks blackened by time, the roof sagging under years of neglect. At first, I thought it was abandoned. But what unsettled me wasn't the structure itself. It was the way it sat, perfectly centered in a small clearing, as though the trees had been forced back, watching from all sides. I stood there for too long, realizing something even stranger. The cabin's windows, dark, cracked, filthy, faced directly toward me, as though it had been waiting. The smart thing would have been to turn around right there. But when you're young and think you're invincible, curiosity feels stronger than fear. I stepped closer. The clearing was unnaturally quiet. No insects, no wind. Just the sound of my own boots crunching dead leaves. The cabin's front door hung slightly open, its hinges groaning in the faint breeze. As I approached, I noticed carvings on the wood. Deep gouges, almost like claw marks, though too deliberate, too human. Circles, eyes, symbols I didn't recognize. I reached the porch and peered through the gap in the door. Dust floated in the thin shaft of light, but inside I saw shapes, furniture maybe, or silhouettes standing still. My stomach tightened. Something shifted in the dark. I jerked back, heart pounding. But after a few seconds, nothing came out. The silence stretched, daring me. Against all reason, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air smelled of mold and iron. The floor groaned under my weight. And then I saw them, frames on the wall, dozens of them, all of them containing photographs of the same clearing, the same view. But I wasn't in any of them, yet. I moved closer, my breath fogging in the stale air. The photos were old, some cracked, some yellowed. Each one showed the cabin's perspective, looking outward at the clearing. In some, snow blanketed the ground. In others, autumn leaves scattered the forest floor. But they all had one thing in common. Someone was always standing in the clearing, not close, not obvious. But if you looked carefully, there was always a figure, small, distant, lurking at the tree line. Sometimes it was a man, sometimes a woman, once even a child. The oldest photo, black and white, showed a man with a hat staring directly at the cabin. I took a shaky step back. My boot hit something. When I looked down, my blood ran cold. A camera, old, heavy, rusted, its lens pointed directly at the door. That's when the floor above me creaked. Someone else was inside. My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Slowly, I raised my head, staring at the ceiling. Another creak echoed, deliberate and heavy, as though someone or something was pacing above. "Hello?" I called, instantly regretting it. My voice sounded small in the suffocating air. Silence. Then, 2 slow footsteps, right above me. I gripped the rusted camera like a weapon, my hands slick with sweat. The air grew colder, the smell of iron stronger. I stepped backward toward the door, keeping my eyes on the ceiling. That's when I noticed something on the wall I hadn't seen before. A frame that wasn't dusty like the others. The photograph inside was clean, new. My stomach dropped. It was the same clearing outside. But this time, the figure wasn't distant. It was me, standing in the exact spot where I'd first seen the cabin. The air left my lungs in a sharp gasp. I dropped the camera, the clatter echoing too loud in the silence. Above me, the footsteps stopped. I backed toward the door, fumbling for the handle. But it wouldn't move. The wood was swollen, stuck. My pulse hammered as I yanked harder. Behind me, the photographs on the walls began to tremble, their frames rattling as though invisible hands were brushing against them. Then, one by one, they fell. The glass shattered across the floor, shards catching the thin shaft of light from the doorway. I froze, staring at the mess. Because the photos weren't just pictures anymore. They were moving. In each shattered frame, the clearing swayed like a film reel. Trees shifted, shadows stretched, and the figures within them turned their heads, not toward the clearing, toward me. I stumbled back, slipping on the broken glass. A sharp sting cut into my palm, but I hardly felt it. My eyes were fixed on the photographs. The figures inside weren't still anymore. They were walking, slowly, deliberately, toward the cabin. My breath caught. The nearest frame showed the clearing in twilight, and I could see myself inside it, standing by the cabin's door. Behind me, in the picture, the cabin door was open, and something stood in the doorway. I whipped around, heart slamming. The doorway was empty, for now. But in the photo, the figure leaned closer, its face obscured by shadow. My legs buckled. I crawled backward across the floor, blood from my cut palms smearing the wood. Then, the sound returned. Not from above this time. From the stairs. Slow, dragging footsteps descending. The staircase groaned under the weight of something heavy. I pressed against the far wall, clutching my bleeding hand, too afraid to move. The first step creaked, then the second. The sound echoed through the cabin like bones snapping. A shadow appeared across the floorboards, stretching longer and longer as whatever it was came closer. Daniel. The voice was thin, almost playful, as though it knew me. I clamped my jaws shut, refusing to answer, but the thing kept coming. I saw its hand first, long, pale fingers gripping the banister, nails cracked and blackened. Then a face leaned into the dim light. But it wasn't a face at all. Just skin stretched too tight, blank where eyes and a mouth should have been. The air thickened, pressing down on me like the weight of earth. My vision swam. I scrambled for the window, desperate. But when I looked through the cracked glass, I saw myself outside again. Only this time, I wasn't moving. I was staring back in. I smashed the window with my elbow, ignoring the pain. Shards rained down, and I hauled myself through the opening. My arms scraped against jagged glass, but adrenaline drowned the sting. I dropped into the clearing, hitting the ground hard. I pushed to my feet and bolted for the tree line, lungs burning. The forest swallowed me whole, branches whipping against my face. I didn't dare look back. But I didn't need to, because the trees around me weren't right. They shifted, bending as though turning to follow. The deeper I ran, the more familiar it all became, until I realized in horror, I was looping. Every path led me back to the same clearing, the same cabin waiting, its windows glowing faintly now, like eyes in the dark. And then I heard it again, that playful whisper curling through the trees. Daniel, you're already home. I fell to my knees, gasping, staring at the cabin. It was alive. I could feel it breathing, its rotten wood swelling with each inhale, creaking with each exhale. The windows glowed brighter, and through them I saw movement. Figures crowding inside, pressing their hands against the glass. Their faces were all wrong, stretched, blurred like melted wax. I forced myself up and ran again, this time straight into the darkness, ignoring the branches tearing at my skin. But no matter how far I went, the trees bent back, funneling me into the clearing. I stopped, trembling, tears streaking my face. And that's when I noticed something new. Another frame hanging on the cabin's outer wall. A photograph. Fresh. It showed me on my knees, staring at the cabin, terror etched across my face. I don't remember choosing to move, but my legs carried me back toward the cabin. Each step felt heavy, like I was sinking into the earth itself. The door creaked open before I touched it, and warm air rolled out, thick with iron and rot. The faceless figure stood inside, waiting. Behind it, the staircase groaned as more shadows descended. The walls pulsed with faint light from the photographs, frames rearranging themselves, ready for the next edition. My next edition. I wanted to fight, to scream, to claw my way back into the forest. But when I looked down, my reflection in the shards of broken glass showed me already inside the cabin, standing among the frames. The last thing I remember is stepping over the threshold. The door slammed shut behind me, and somewhere in the dark, a camera clicked. And there you have it. Dark Fear's family. 10 of the most disturbing, true Appalachian deep woods horror stories. The mountains hold beauty, yes, but also shadows. Shadows that whisper, stalk, and sometimes consume those who dare to wander too deep. Whether it was the screams from Miller's Gorge, the vanishing footsteps along Devil's Backbone, or the twisted encounters that left scars far beyond the forest, these stories remind us of one chilling truth. In the Appalachians, the woods are never truly empty. Something is always watching. So tell me, after hearing these tales, would you ever dare to camp alone in those mountains? Or would you stay far away, leaving the trails to the ones who lurk in the dark? If you enjoyed tonight's journey into the unknown, make sure you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and join our Dark Fears family for more terrifying true horror every week. Until next time, sleep with the lights on. And remember, sometimes the scariest things are the ones waiting just beyond the tree line. Thanks for watching. This was Dark Fears.